Right over to you, man.
Thank you. So my quick introduction is going to be largely for our video audience, and then I'm going to turn it over quickly to our partners at CMRPC. This is Chris, and I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to get your pronunciation correct. Ranak?
Yes.
Okay, and Ron. So, as I said, for the benefit of those who don't know, I'm going to do a brief introduction, kind of like starting with the big picture and sort of zooming down into what's going on in Mendon. So, I just want to start out with 40B. It's, as you know, it's a statute that's been around for 40 years. It's always been controversial. It's extremely complicated. It's very imperfect. Has it been successful? In many respects it has, because it's created a lot of housing, but it also has, aggravated a lot of towns and been difficult for people to work with. So the statute provides a goal of 10% of all housing units to be affordable in each town in the Commonwealth. And for affordable, we mean for families with income levels that are based on a HUD formula that's called the 80% moderate income, which in Mendon currently would be about $68,000 per household with a family of 4. So for towns that have less than 10% of their housing as affordable, the statute allows developers to get expedited permitting and bypass some of the local density bylaws in exchange for providing building affordable housing and limiting their profits.
Hey, Bill, can I
Go ahead.
get back up just real quickly
Please.
on the that 80% rule, the 68,000 you mentioned? Can you just say more about that? Because I mean, even though you've talked to me about that, and I've been to a few things with you, and I have a bigger leg up than somebody else at home would have, I still don't quite understand, as I sit here, I can't even remember the detail. Just explain what that means.
That's, sure, if you want to. I mean, this is an incredibly difficult thing to, it's not a straight formula, so it's very difficult to.
Well, I'm not looking for the formula being explained so much as what the number means, why it's important.
Well, the number is actually applied to the area median. So obviously, the area median would be 100%. So the 80% is just short of the area median. So the area median income is the Boston metropolitan area. So, we essentially,
Gotcha.
in some ways, are sort of beholden to that.
Okay, so would I be correct in understanding it as the folks that may be in play for housing that follows under that comes from this initiative applies to those who the income of the family is less than 80% of that
At or
median.
below, yes.
At or below that median.
Correct.
Okay, I think that's important because I don't think people might have got that from what you were saying.
And it's a family of 4, correct?
There are various income levels based on family size. So it's a sliding scale from 1-person household up to, I think, about an 8-person household.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what that really means then is, for the purpose of this whole discussion tonight, that a household bringing in as much as $68,000 could qualify for some of this type of housing we're going to talk about tonight.
For a
right?
family of 4.
The 68, as he would be a family of 4. That's the
Okay.
And then
slide.
it's going to
Yes.
drop
If it's
by certain percentage points if it's a family of 3,
Got it.
certain percentage
Right,
points.
right.
Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind is that for projects that are, and you probably know this already, but for projects that are rental projects, not only do the affordable units count toward the inventory, but all of the units, even if market rate, count toward the inventory. So you can pretty much get a big chunk if it's a rental project. If it's a for sale project, a condo project, only those affordable units will count. So it,
okay.
All right, so just so I'm clear on that, but not to derail your presentation, Bill, but just so I'm clear, when you say rental, is that like a Section 8, or is that
no. This is different. from
strictly just financial?
Versus ownership.
Correct.
Okay.
It would be like a market rate apartment that would be done by Avalon, except that project where it would look exactly the same from the outside.
Yep.
A scattering of 20% of those units is going to have a less of a tenant finish inside and be within the affordable program.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep.
Thanks, Bill.
I'm actually glad that you interrupted because, I'm trying to keep this brief and snappy so we can get right over to the exercise that CMRPC has prepared. So, but I think that's an incredibly important thing for people to understand. So, yeah, HUD has a formula. It's not a direct like 0.8 times the median income, but there's a table that dictates for each county what that area median is, and then there's an 80% number, a 60% number, a 50% number, and a 30% number. So it gets complicated. But
I'm sure there's places
80
on the web that people could go to find the details.
yeah, and even then, it's a fun time trying to figure out what the proper number is. But at any rate, yes, for a household, it's based on the number of persons in the household and the area median income. But the point really is that affordable at that income level, this is for people that have incomes, but just need some assistance. This is not for people that have no incomes. That's a completely different picture. So under 40B, if towns don't have 10% affordable housing units, number of units, they basically have to accept 40B projects that come along, and or they can try to get above the 10%, or they can try to get what's called a safe harbor, which is a temporary thing, by making significant progress toward the goal on a 1 or 2 year basis, and having a production plan in place, and we'll talk about that again later, because that is important. So for Mendon, that safe harbor would mean producing about 22 units per year. It's still very aggressive for a town this size. So for Mendon,
Over X amount of year, over 2 years? How many years? 22 per year, you said.
yeah, it's a 1 or 2, you want to just give it a brief
What it
cut?
is it's a 1/2 of 1% of the number that you need to reach on an annualized basis. So if you have that housing production plan in place, whatever that housing production plan, what number that's specified in there, you need to at least meet that 0.5% on an annualized basis. And so that's one way, and absolutely correct. The other two ways are the unfriendly 40B, where a developer finds your community so compelling, doesn't want to work with the Board of Appeals and you guys. They can jump directly to the state and get something approved through that. But the better way for a developer to approach it is to have a local initiative program where they can collaborate with you. You can tell them what you want, and hopefully by working it out in a negotiation type setting, you'll end up with something that both parties can come away with smiling.
Okay.
Or at least not frowning.
So housing being one of the major components of a master plan, which also would include, infrastructure and services and economic development, transportation, natural resources, it makes sense that we should have a vision for discussing housing. And for Mendon, we have about 2,200 housing units. Our affordable housing goal, if we were to try to get to 10%, would be 225. We currently have 40. So we would need 185 to reach that goal. It's very difficult for a small town. But we can make
those
progress.
numbers again, please?
Yep. About 2,200 housing units, 2,250, I believe, is closer to the correct number right now.
Oh, I thought we were closer to 1,600. That's interesting. Okay.
Housing units, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, what is?
Oh, so that includes if a property has several apartments in it, it's so if you have a 4
One unit.
apartment building, that's 4 units, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, so the goal would be 10% of that.
Okay, so that's where the 225 comes
Yep,
from.
we
and you
currently
say
have,
you only
we currently have 40.
So it's just about 2%, a little less than
Correct.
2%.
You-
This one here? Or that?
I think it's you, Rich, maybe. So, my point basically is that housing deserves to be treated just like any other major component of the master plan, that we should have a vision for it, we should have a discussion about it, they're all interrelated components in the master plan, so this is great that we're here and talking about it and trying to get a vision for it and put things into play. As far as the need in Mendon, the trend right now is toward, we follow the trend that's going on all over the state, which is household size is continually decreasing, and the average age of the population is steadily increasing. I'm not going to provide numbers, but I got tons of numbers, data that's very interesting about the projections for what's going to happen with our population and the demand for our housing. And in Mendon, we basically have very few options for anybody who's looking to downsize, a single person, smaller families, people who are looking to get started in housing in town, or people who are looking to remain in town, but just can't afford or don't want that large single-family home anymore. And the data is there to show it, and I hear it all the time. I talk to people about it, and they're echoing this back all the time. So let's zoom down a little bit to CPA. So the town has CPA funds. 10% of them must be dedicated to affordable housing. We currently have about $390,000 in that bucket. And those funds, in a project like we'll be talking about tonight, can be used to, as subsidies. So we have before us, an opportunity at 52 Providence Street. And tonight we're here to explore, the sort of general discussion about housing, but we want to use 52 Providence and the possibilities there as, food for discussion and to stimulate the conversation. So we purchased about 75 acres at 52 Providence with CPA money, partly to get the land to use for a senior center expansion. And of course, the uses have to be CPA purposes, so we would be talking about, it's up on the screen over there now, would be for open space, recreation, housing. And several studies have been done. And the latest one, which is the diagram over there on the left, from CDM Smith, recommended that we look at pursuing housing on 3.2 acres, which is down in the lower left-hand corner of that parcel. Thanks, Ron. We currently have a grant from Department of Housing and Community Development, which is funding this exercise, and a process that includes doing more engineering study to be able to identify all the constraints on that property. Community engagement process, which, as I said to you before, I find to be the most important piece of this, because we really need everybody, departments in town government and our residents and all citizens who are interested in this, no matter what their opinions, engaged in the discussion. The grant funds preparation of local approvals, and development of an RFP that we would put out to developers who want to build whatever we say we want. So the workshop tonight is partly about, excuse me, trying to come to some consensus on what our needs are, what our preferences are. This is going to lead to development of design standards. After we leave tonight, we have a lot of work to do to determine what's possible, both from the engineering side, from a financial perspective, and then, at the end of the process, we'll be preparing an RFP to be able to put out to invite developers to build. So with that, I just want to, unless you have questions, I just want to turn it right over to CMRPC, and we'll get started on the exercise for tonight.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
So I just want to summarize and make sure I understand, and hopefully for the benefit of the people at home.
Please.
If I pull the plane up to 30,000 feet, basically what we're saying is target affordable housing is 10%.
That's the state's goal.
We're at under 2.
Right.
If we do nothing, then a developer has the right to come in and force a 40B project on us with very little control by ourselves.
Correct.
If, rather, we increase our ability to control our own destiny by making progress to go from the 2% we're at now to 10%. And the parcel we're going to talk about tonight is one way to make some of that progress. Have I correctly summarized?
That's right.
Could I follow up on that just one
Yes.
second? Yes, I think, and the detail is that the three ways that you can make local progress and have local control and be proactive about it, number one is to have control over a parcel and essentially design the framework for how something's going to happen on that parcel. That's number one. Number two is to have a local initiative program where you would be inviting developers that would be following along what you're interested in. In other words, you could set some guidelines and thresholds and say any developer that would like to work with us within this framework, we'd like to have discussions with you. And that could lead to a local initiative program project. That's two. And number three is to have the housing production plan put in place, and that would have a much more detailed set of guidelines, and then from that, it shows what a developer would have to do in order to negotiate that process. So all three of those areas, you would maintain a lot more control than just sitting back.
And I think the way that I also understood it is if we have that progress plan in place and we're proving that we're marching forward and meeting at least a certain threshold, I think it was 22 units annual over time, then that could help block a substantial project if one was to come into town. Is that correct? Okay. All right.
I mean, maybe the substantial project we'd be okay with, but maybe we wouldn't, right?
That's good. It depends on
So,
what it
so
is.
then the argument from some folks might be, okay, well, we've kind of done the head of the ostrich in the sand till now, we've been fine. But going like that, we're just rolling the dice.
We can talk about this at some length, but I think we know that the housing market is heating up. It's really, sooner or later, a project is going to come to town. I'm not saying that for a fact.
Yeah.
We should be
But you
prepared.
think so, yeah.
That's absolutely right.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, would you folks like to introduce yourselves and take it away? Sure.
I'm Chris Ryan. I'm the manager of Planning and Community Development for CMRPC. And I've worked with you folks in the past on the master plan, with the master plan committee, and that's an ongoing initiative, so I'm really eager to get that going again, and really great to hear that things are looking good to reestablish the committee. And I'll turn it over to my staff here to do the VPS.
Hello, I'm Ronak Moradi. I recently started working for CMRPC, and I recently graduated from my second master in public administration. I have a design background. I have a bachelor in architecture and another master in urban design. So I will be really happy to help through this great process.
And I'm Ron Barron. I've started at CMRPC back in January. I'm working on housing and energy issues with CMRPC. And what we've been asked to do as an organization for this is principally do the community outreach portion of it. We're spearheading that. We are looking to develop the design guidelines that will end up being attached to the RFP that will go with that particular parcel. And we will be helping draft that RFP when it does come out. And so with the design guideline portion, that's where Ronak is going to be part of our team. She's going to be helping us really nail down how that's going to work. So what we were thinking about doing for this particular meeting is we wanted to try to, as a starting point, try to get a sense from the community as to what kinds of housing options most appeal to them. So what we have in the room right now is a physical representation of an online survey, which is the chief vehicle for trying to get that information. That online survey actually went live today. So we actually will be handing out information to everybody that's here, so that when you've done this activity, if anybody you know that you think would be interested in it, you can share that information. We can try to get as many voices on this as humanly possible. So we're going to give everybody a little clipboard with a scoring sheet. We're going to be walking around the room and looking at all of these images and rating it on a scale, which I'll get into in a minute. Right after that, we're going to reconvene here and we're going to have a discussion period where we're going to try to unpack some of that and get some more qualitative information on what everybody thought of the images and what everybody thinks of housing in general, what the needs are in the town.
So, Kimberly, just because we don't have a huge attendance here tonight, is there a way that we can get that posted right on our Mendon website?
Of course.
Okay, so I'd like to get that done.
Bill has already been working on that.
Okay, cool.
Is Dan helping you with that?
Yeah, and for tonight's audience, or for future video audience, the images that you see here will be up on the screen over here, and the TV cameras will be focused on the screen so that anybody watching at home will understand what we're doing here tonight.
Okay. So here will be another plug that anybody watching this, I would encourage a huge community turnout, at least to take part of the survey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is actually only going to be the first of 2 community meetings, and the second one is going to be where we are going to present the preliminary design guidelines, and the community will have a chance to weigh in on it. And we're looking at some strategies to try to raise the profile of this project a little bit more from where it is right now.
So let us know as soon as you get the survey up, because we'll put it on our Facebook sites. I don't know, you don't have one yet, do you?
I'll have it to you
No,
tomorrow.
don't.
I think you need to make one. Mr. Chairman.
I still haven't grasped the concept of Facebook yet. I have to ask my daughter.
So the next thing I wanted to do is just walk very quickly through how the visual preference survey activity is going to work. Around the room, we have posted 40 images grouped broadly into 2 categories. The first group over here on the, well, I guess it's my left, your right, would end up are the housing type category. So we want everybody to take a look. It's the first 20 images to be thinking about the density, to be thinking about the style and that sort of thing. The second group, the next 20, are more about architectural elements and landscape elements. So we have a mix of some images showing balconies, some images showing landscape, and what we want you to do is take maybe, only a few seconds per image as you walk around the room, and on the sheets that we're going to have here, score that from on a range of -7 to +7. And the reason it's so fine-grained is because this actually mirrors exactly what we have on the online survey. So we want to be able to take these hard copies, we're going to take them back to our office, plug them online, and we're just going to add them to the totals from what we get out today.
So really what is just first impression, gut feeling about the image, whether it's significantly negative to you in your impression or very positive. And if you feel like you want to make comments related to that specific numbered photograph, certainly an opportunity to do that as well.
So should we categorize them based upon the specific idea of this one location or in general?
That's a good question, yeah.
Well, I think, clearly, this particular site, we've assembled these photographs largely with that in mind, but it could be a greater domain of feedback that could inform other sites within town in terms of housing. But for example, if you had something closer to the town center, you might, for example, be a little bit more amenable to a townhouse versus a garden apartment. So, but in general, your impression overall of the positivity of the architectural style and the layout and the density.
Well, I'll tell you now that the town shouldn't depend upon my sense of style.
Mrs. Schofield should be here for this one.
Oh, there's no, among a lot of other people, so I really hope people will jump on back to, just to, elaborate on what you said. I hope a lot of people jump on and as we advertise this and give their opinion.
Okay. So if we don't mind, getting started.
Just to put a plug in for the people of Mendon, when we did the master plan survey, we got an enormous number of responses.
Yeah.
And it was very helpful to our
Did you
purposes,
depend or do you
and
have
so, you're right, if we can get a ton of responses here,
Want it to be anonymous,
this
so
will
they
be
black or
a
blue.
wonderful thing.
The more the
Oh,
better.
no, don't worry about it. We won't remember. So if we can start over on this side here under the clock, that's number 1, and you'll see on the scoring sheet, each box is numbered, and there's a numbered image, and as long as you mark what's corresponding with the image, that way we'll be able to
Are they anonymous?
upload it as soon as possible.
Okay, so refresh my memory, the first section is just on architectural elements?
The first section is actually on housing types, so we're looking at single housing versus apartments versus cottages, that sort of thing. Then after number 20, so like 21 to 40 is looking at architectural and landscape elements. So,
No kidding, huh? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So can you put up the,
I'm working on it.
yep, and then we have to keep this, circle on the site from here to the screen. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
can you actually run it? Can you hand me all of those? Just to get them out of the. Downloading. Come on.
All right, people, keep the line moving. So if we chose 0, we're neutral. Is that that? Yep.
Yeah.
Tricking us. No, but I don't think it's.
I'm really doing first impressions.
This is just a picture of a garden.
Yeah, no, that's
clearly just
art-
the-
landscaping and architecture.
It's kind of
Just like a little like entry to the garden. Garden, okay.
I like it live, I don't know what to say. I like it in the house, that looks like mine, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Thank you for
Raised garden and playground in the city.
This is the same picture as that.
It's the same picture.
Yeah, different shots. Do you like to see cars? This is the same building. That is.
Right, it's a shot without the.
Different color. Oh, this is red.
Do it yourself. I don't like this at all.
Yeah, that one, 13.
How's that?
Take it from me.
I know,
I don't think we formally met, Chris Ryan.
we met before, I think, at something, and maybe
one of the
master plan,
events.
and maybe master plan.
Really, that long ago?
Yeah, potentially, potentially.
That was over a year. That was almost 2 years ago.
Right, yes. Yes, but a couple of years ago.
The first thing I thought of when I looked at this is, where's the close?
Oh my God, these guys are taking forever.
I know, what was it? So the first 20 were what?
This is architectural features.
Got it.
I like what I like.
You got the eye, huh?
Thank you. If I'd been being efficient, I would have been doing this all along, but here's the flags, right? Let you know the information. The survey is live now, so if you guys want to share that, feel free.
Very good. We talked a couple times last week, and I just went to his office.
I think I regret a picture of this flyer.
Kind of
So we get that on the screen.
Did you finish already, Mark?
Oh, yeah.
Because what we don't want is to, get to the second use that everybody knows about it.
Should I just leave these here?
Yeah, go ahead, it's fine. Thank you for coming, I appreciate it. I'll trade you that one. All right,
Thank you.
give out the information. Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much.
So is it a one-year?
I'm not, that's all right, I just gotta finish.
How long is the term for the 3 years? Okay.
Yeah, it's a 3-year term, and then, but what's good is these two have just, Mark is now on his 5th year virtually on the school. So, and then my term will be at the end of this year.
See how much is going.
Yeah, right, we'll see what happens after this year.
Are we on a time limit here?
Take your time.
Technically, but you got plenty. Don't worry.
Said 10 seconds per piece. That's what it said.
Move on.
Gavel on them.
I'm glad I deserve that.
Tased.
So this is the online survey you were talking about? This is the same thing?
And you should take a picture of that and upload it to your Facebook right now.
The same scale, the same images, in the same order. So the hope is that, we can get some preliminary information from everybody who took it today. And then, hopefully people think it's an interesting enough exercise that will encourage people to take it. And Bill actually has a image file of this that he can share if you want to email it, if you guys want to put it on. Well, you're not going to, if other people want to put it on.
I think eventually I'll put it on. These guys have been drilling me. I have an account, I just
All right. Thank you, and I'll give you these. And see how optimistic I was with the number.
Yeah, that's.
You never tell.
Look at the fast one.
11, I guess, is in common.
Very tasteful, yeah. Even so, to be honest with you, even so, not that we have.
Well, that's good, because I actually didn't do it. Because I realized that slideshow.
Right, and if they're watching and they're like, what are they doing? I want to do that thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bill, actually, I thought that was pretty cool. There was some neat designs, and there were some designs that I definitely didn't like. So I really hope we get a lot of folks that look at this and take the survey. One question that I have is, when do you want to have this completed by? What's our goal for completion?
Do you have a termination date for the?
Yes, we're, for the online survey, we don't actually have a hard termination date for it yet. We were looking to keep it running for about a month, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how many responses we get. So we're going to be, it's just started today, so we're hopefully maybe by like the mid to the end of July, it'll be up.
Okay. So if we said end of July, that way we can start reaching out to the folks that we know and encouraging them to take it. I'd just like to give them a hard date. So if we could just select a hard date, that would be great.
It looks like Mr. Schofield's reaching out already.
I am indeed posting this now.
I will send you an official copy tomorrow.
How about Friday, July 21st?
Okay, that's cool.
It's like a good.
Yep. That work for you guys? Perfect.
Chris was pointing out that it's interesting to have the survey like before discussion and before it's scored, because I agree, because it really sort of sparks your thinking as to how to talk about the parameters of housing that we value. The same thing. Okay.
How do you want us to get the results of this little session to you guys? Just an email circulated? Okay, we could certainly do that.
As far as the survey results?
Yes, but not the survey results, but tonight's exercise, just, the small sample of what came out of tonight. In other words, what we can come up with is mean scores. So, for example, for slide number 11, which I know a lot of people really seem to like, my guess is you're probably going to get a mean score somewhere in the 5 to 7 range, maybe 5.5, something like that.
Excuse me.
Can you keep running the pictures? Is that possible?
Well, we were going to move into the discussion period of it, and there was a PowerPoint that went along with that.
Yeah. So actually, the online survey, both Selectman Schofield and Selectman Reel have posted on their Facebook, which actually have those slides. So if folks want to visit their page to get the link right away, they can. I don't know when it's going to be on our town website. I assume it's going to be up tomorrow. Just click on the link and they'll have access to all the different slides. And I'm sure I'll end up looking at them a couple of times again, so. All right.
So for the second portion of it, we were going to have a sort of an open-ended discussion, and Chris was going to moderate that discussion to try to, see how we can dig into what we were just looking at.
And Ron is going to be taking some notes on a flip chart so that you can see some of the comments that you've made, and Ronak will be taking notes as well, a little more detailed. And we'll, along with the results of this for you guys, we'll send you a summary of the comments that were made. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we think about choosing a framework for this site. And it's a great opportunity for you guys as a first project in terms of local housing in a proactive manner. The first thing I want to say is that, certainly our town centers specifically, but our towns in general, are really our lifeblood. They're our character. We really want to make sure that everything that we allow to be placed and developed, modified, rehabbed, is within that character to the greatest extent possible. Our town centers are our traditional gathering places, and in some communities right now they tend to be areas of strong commerce, and in other communities who want to build up the town center and make it a little bit more vibrant in terms of walkability, of people being able to walk to stores, a greater variety of stores and housing types. It really lends itself to that, and I think the master plan is exactly moving in the direction of coming up with those goals and that vision. But with Bill's permission, even though the master plan has not yet been adopted, there has been a vision statement that was created for the master plan, and I know that we worked very closely with you guys to put something in place that represents what you want to see going forward. So I'm going to read it very quickly. A vision for Mendon. The residents take great pride in Mendon's small-town atmosphere, agricultural character, heritage, beautiful open space, and sense of community. The vision of this master plan is to preserve Mendon's character and sense of place while making sound decisions to plan and prepare for future change. This master plan will balance development with Mendon's sense of community, ensure that open space and water resources are protected, and enhance heritage properties and landscapes. The town wants to create and encourage opportunities for future generations of Mendon residents to live, work, and play here as current residents have enjoyed. So if that is generally representative of how you folks believe that the future should carry itself out, or if there's anything else you want to add to that, that's great. But if you want to just sort of leave it at that, I can jump into the discussion of the particular site. Any thoughts?
I thought that pretty well said it.
I was just going to say the same thing. It's pretty well.
I was just going to comment that that statement was basically compiled from residents participating in a workshop such as this, and not written for us. So it definitely
Yeah,
is
that
representative.
I think we can be very confident represents the attitude of the Mendon people. Over 800 people responded to that survey, so
Yeah.
that's a good percentage.
Yeah, Mark, you happy with that too? Definitely.
So with that in mind, and I know that I'm going to be working with this right here, but the slides will be what I'm following along with. Imagine the town in 10, 20, or 30 years. What would you like to see change? What would you like to see retained and maintained and protected? Obviously, things do change. Things must change in some ways, but the more control you have over that in terms of design, placement, density, layout, it allows you to shape the character of how the town center and the surrounding areas will evolve. So what do you want the town to be like for next generations? Can this vision that I've read out to you, can that facilitate something for this particular parcel as a good start? So we're going to talk about housing types. And you saw a lot of different housing types on these slides. So I think the first question would be, what would be the most desirable housing type that you saw? Is it a clustered single-family development? Is it something that would have townhouses, duplexes, maybe a garden, low-rise apartment complex? Or are there several different types that you think might be appropriate? So we talked a little bit about rental versus ownership. This 3.2 acres is a very small portion of the site itself, but think about what might be a good first development that in case there were other opportunities on the site later or elsewhere in town, this would set the mark. This would show everybody the greatest positive step that could go forward and might sort of reduce the resistance in the future to this type of housing going forward. And of course, right-sizing that for the 3.2 acres not only how much that you place, how many units are placed on the 3.2 acres, but how are they configured? Do you want to, cluster them in a small portion and retain the rest for open space? Do you want to spread them all out? There are a lot of different ways to approach it, and it also depends upon how you think this site would ultimately connect or not necessarily be connected to the town itself. Do you want it to be something that is integrated into the greater network of the town in terms of transportation, sidewalks, walking trails, bike paths, or do you want it something that is sort of sequestered and self-contained on the site as sort of like a standalone type of thing? And that certainly will depend also on the site surrounding uses as well. So, single-family housing, up in this in these selection of slides, there are several different single-family developments. Concord Riverwalk, I think, is a great example of what can be done to have a small cottage-like house in a fairly bucolic setting.
Which number?
That's number 11. There are a number of different developments in the metro area now that are emulating that particular model. The developer who did Concord Riverwalk is a fairly prolific housing developer in the region, and it may be good to have an opportunity to take a field trip to some of these developments just to see closer at hand what they look like. So in terms of neighborhoods, again, certainly creating a more traditional pocket, traditional-like neighborhood, maybe in a grid with a small park, or something that clusters around a green or a small open space. Sometimes those open spaces can have shared facilities like a fire pit or benches or things of that nature. Open space design development is another way of approaching it, where you make sure that you set aside a certain percentage of open space to serve not only the development necessarily, but maybe even the town, the greater town could utilize that open space as a park. In terms of multi-unit housing, getting beyond the model of the single family, certainly three different ways of looking at that. The apartment building, which I think is more appropriately placed in a town or near a town center, would be something that would be, match the street setback of storefront buildings or something like that. I don't personally see it as necessarily appropriate for this site, but others may feel differently. The townhouse type of development, which would be essentially a single-family attached unit, maybe with 3 attached up to maybe 5 to 7 in a single building. That's something that I think the one that's showing there in the middle is a little more urban than you may have in mind, but there are other examples of townhouses that are a little bit more, maybe a colonial type of style that would be more appropriate. And then the garden apartment complex, which the one over on the left is one example of that. I think all the Avalon communities that you may have seen in the metro area is another example of having something with a long landscaped entrance, a lot of open space, and a lot of setbacks and buffers that protect it from or protect it to or from the surrounding area, with an apartment building that might have anywhere from 12 to 40 units in a single building. So that's the multi-unit opportunity as well. Certainly, it depends upon the density that you're looking for or are comfortable with. A lot of things go into evaluating the appropriateness of density. All right, the landscape and architectural elements. Some of the discussion points that we'll get to when I go through this very quickly. Certainly, open space and landscaped areas provide places to congregate, to recreate, to play, to rest, to just sort of be out in nature. Also, they allow for making connections of the site, again, to outside of the site itself or within the site. There may be a senior center that you may want to allow walkability from this open space to. There might be local trails, paths, and bike lanes that could connect to it. And also between neighbors. Certainly, that's another way of looking at connectivity. So in terms of landscape elements, Open spaces, both passive and active open spaces. The parking treatment, would we want to see parking in the front of units? You can certainly have alleys that could serve the backs of the units. So if the units are fronting on the green, a lot of times, since they're a little clustered closer together than usual single-family homes are, if you have garages in the front or allow parking in the front, it could kind of overwhelm the sense of the landscape. A lot of times, there's a set-aside parking area that's walkable to the units, or again, you could backload the units to bring them in the rear. Trees, landscaping, and sidewalks. Again, the open spaces can be formalized. I think you see in the Concord Riverwalk development, it is sort of a formalized green
number?
space shape. That's number 11.
I'll give us your Vanna White hands. Thank you. Same ones, okay.
Right. So it is a formalized, it's a rectangular open space, but they've kind of softened it with wildflower plantings, a lot of different treatments you could have there. You could have a lawn, more of a traditional New England town green with like shown in the landscape elements with a, what do you call that?
Gazebo.
A gazebo, there you go. Absolutely. So that's another thing. Again, if you have it insular, like the slide 11 we saw, it is available. It's public open space in Concord, I believe. Anybody can go in there and walk around, but it tends to be less accessible visually and from a pedestrian standpoint. If you really wanted to integrate it into the greater community, you might want to open it up a little bit. So in terms of architectural elements, and I'll go through this fairly quickly, this may or may not be of strong interest to you, but there's a lot of things that we can do within the design guidelines to ensure a traditional New England style of design, or we could leave it more market related. I mean, certainly there's a wide range that we could either make the design guidelines very, very specific to a style or a range of styles that you're very comfortable with, or we could just make sure that certain types of materials are not used, like tilt-up concrete or aluminum siding or that type of thing. So that's kind of the range of how we can add or subtract from the guidelines. But the mode, you could have a New England feel, traditional, you can allow for modern. Materials, certainly wood, brick, stucco sometimes would work, sometimes it doesn't. Attached elements, you could have variable setbacks to provide variety. The chimney, the columns, and the towers also provide some texture. Roof lines, pitches are also areas that you can either integrate with the local architectural vernacular or allow for some variability. Windows are also a great way of providing texture to a facade. And then other aesthetical elements provide order, rhythm, scale, harmony, and a sense of beauty. So at this point, what I want to do is based on that sort of pretext and then your opportunity to go through these slides, I just wanted to open it up to you to talk about what would be desirable housing in your mind in terms of the context of the site, the context of the area of town in which it would be located in. Certainly when we talk about things like density, we have to be concerned on one end for how much traffic volume is going to be generated. In some cases, you need to be cognizant if there are going to be units that are affordable, there will likely be some school component that will be related to it. And on the other hand, you also want to make sure that the developer has a reasonable rate of return to want to do it. So it's finding that balance. And certainly the other questions that relate are how many units would you like to be contributed toward the sustainable, the affordable housing inventory. And the lower the density, the smaller number of units, the less impact, obviously, this particular project in itself is going to have. But again, it would be a good starting point to show the community a great project to get everybody comfortable and for future projects. So with that in mind, love to hear what your thoughts are.
I'll start off. Well, I really something that kind of going off of the types and design, but something I've mentioned to Bill in the past was that, a lot of times we talk about the need for housing for the elderly, and, as I recognize that there is a growing elderly population that does need a different type of housing, I think we also need to remember that we have people my age who would like to stay in Mendon that really can't afford to buy some of these large homes, and there's really not many options for smaller homes. So, when I look at number 11 up there, the smaller cottage-style home really, I think, would attract all age groups if you're looking for a smaller home to either start off with or to retire to, and so that was really striking to me. But that's where I am right now.
Great.
Rich?
My reaction is the same as the Austrian king in the movie Mozart. Too many notes, Mozart, just cut a few and it'd be perfect. I'm overwhelmed by the number of things that we just talked through, so I can't even fight my way through it yet, so I gotta.
It's pretty funny you say that, because for somebody who's in, building and construction, even I'm overwhelmed right now. And I deal a lot with this stuff, and what I'm really struggling with is the density piece of it. Is really what are we looking for in respect to density on 3.2 acres? And really what are our goals for that parcel? And that's where I'm getting hung up, to be honest with you. We have some really attractive townhouses across the street. I mean, they're beautiful. Could I see something down there like that? I absolutely could. Could I see, like Mark said, a couple little cottages down there? I absolutely could. But what I can concretely say is I want something to be, colonial style, or, within the fabric of Mendon. I'm not looking for bricks and mortar. I'm looking for wood. I'm looking for, something that's gonna stay, rural. We just created a historical district right here. We're not gonna go and put some big giant mammoth bricks and mortar building down the street. We're just not gonna do it.
That's why we kind of thought that again, going back to the Concord project, you've got clapboard siding, you've got front porches. Front porches, create a sense of community. People sit on those porches, they talk to people walking by, versus, the subdivisions that have been built since the 80s. Everybody's always on their back deck, and people drive into their garage, and you don't see them for the rest of the day. There's no sense of neighborhood. There's no sense of community there. Right. That allows you to develop a sense of community, and a lot like the old neighborhoods from the 1880s to the 1930s in this country, in towns like Mendon, Uxbridge, all the surrounding communities that have the town center surrounding neighborhoods.
Chris, I'm not sure if I'm going to ask this question all that eloquently, but I would, what I'm getting confused about is there a certain number of units that we have to earmark as affordable for a developer to kind of cluster, do cluster building, if you will? Or do all the units have to be treated as affordable?
If the project is a for sale project, only you have to set aside 20%.
20%.
So if you have 10 units, it would be 2.
Okay.
Usually in a situation, and again, if you don't have a bylaw, but you could write it certainly into the RFP if you wanted to, that if the developer did not provide enough units to come up with a concrete, even number, that you could ask them to pay into an affordable housing fund, the equivalent amount of money for that fraction.
Okay.
That's something that can be done too.
Okay.
But if it's going to be a rental project, which it doesn't seem, if it's going to be a cluster cottage development, it's likely to be that, then all of the units would count toward the affordable number.
I gotcha. And boy, I had a follow-up question. I think I just totally lost it. So keep on going for a second, and it'll come back to me.
So is the rental option owned by the community and managed by, or does it matter if it's a sold project that's rentals and then they all count?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be owned by the community. It's usually owned and managed by a traditional apartment, no, not even a housing authority, no. Because we're talking, this is a market rate project that just happens to have affordable units scattered within it. This is not a Section 8 project. This is not public housing in any way. I want people to really strongly understand that. This will not be, what you imagine, the brick public housing in an urban area. No, not at all. This would look, if it's an apartment complex, would look exactly like an Avalon project. A lot of the market rate units would have stainless steel sinks, granite countertops, the highest end appointments. It would just be that those affordable units would probably have Formica and maybe a more typical low-end sink.
So the question that slipped my mind was, when we do cluster housing, right now our zoning bylaw says 2 acres of land, I believe it's 2 acres.
Acre and a half.
Is it an acre and a half now for a lot? Is it a quarter acre or is it a half? How big is the lot now when you're doing cluster?
Well, there's two different ways to do it. Number one, you could do it on a lot-by-lot basis, and I would think for something like that over on slide 11, you're probably talking about 1/8 of an acre or smaller per lot. But then you'd have the common area of the open space to be more of an area that would be shared. Now, the other way of doing it is condoizing it. Essentially, the whole property would be under single ownership, and the units would be placed around in a logical, sequence, but all the grassy areas in between, the open space, the trash areas, the mail areas, all those would be held in common ownership and run by a condominium association. That's another way of going about it.
Okay. I do like the green spaces, I do like common areas, and I do like the accessibility to the senior center and the walking trails. Fortunately, this parcel, it basically meets all that criteria, which is fantastic. And to Selectman Reel's point, we have an aging community here that most likely, I could anticipate going down there and benefiting from some of those units.
Right.
But now you have, do we have units with, multi-level and stuff like that? Do we have to worry about accessibility? Do you have a master bedroom on the first floor or something like that? Or,
Right.
Whatever it may be for mobility issues or whatever, that's the kind of stuff that goes through my mind when I think about that.
Right. Well, and one of the things I was going to say that there are a lot of different types of units that would be eligible for the subsidized housing inventory. Assisted living projects would be eligible, and they would count as rental. Continuing care retirement communities that have the various levels of independence for the residents would be counted as a for sale type of community. If you wanted to do, for example, group homes, which I don't think you do in this particular case, but just to let you know that group homes are eligible to have their units on the inventory as well.
So when you classify a unit, it's per individual person, it's not per dwelling, correct? It's per dwelling, because I know that,
Except in the case of a group home.
I was gonna say group home, it's individual. Right, I know that, yeah.
I don't want to complicate things, but you have to remember, and this may be that I didn't understand your question a few questions ago, but anyway, this is CPA land. So CPA itself has income limitations. They're higher than the affordable limitations that DHCD puts out. So in my mind, if you're already most of the way there, we can dictate that these are going to be all affordable units, even if they're for sale.
Okay.
Yeah, 20% is a minimum
Right.
for a project, but
For an
you can have-
outside developer coming in under
That's
an
helpful.
unfriendly 40B.
That's
But we're in-
helpful.
At the moment, we're in charge of this piece of property, and we can say what we want there, and we can say we want them all to be affordable,
Sure.
even though they're ownership units.
I want to say something for clarifying. For example, our apartment, when you go to the website, it has a chart that you can see how many people are you. So for example, 2, and see your like wage, and you can see, so you can get this apartment with this, yeah, this income, this like discount, and also this discount. So each person can look and pick, their apartment. So it's working for all apartments, all different types in one like building. It depends on what kind of architecture you want to go for it, but it could work for everything.
I think that the combination of the design guidelines and the requirements of the RFP, you're going to be able to shape and mold whatever type of project that you want to see there.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can provide the kind of flexibility that you think would be reasonable for a developer to be attracted to the site, and throw it out there and see what kind of response you get. If the response is overwhelming, you have a lot to pick from. If the response is underwhelming, then maybe there's some things that could be tweaked to make it better, but.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to answer now? Go ahead.
So are you seeing as a trend, so when you're talking about the Avalon complexes as a comparable, which is what I envision mostly when I'm talking down there, but this Concord Riverway with these individual housing dwellings, is this are we trending more towards this now with housing projects and rather than the large complexes? And if we trended towards something more specialized like this, does it actually change sort of our competitive nature of our projects with developers in an RFP process? Like there's more return on investment, right, for a larger project for them?
Certainly,
So
yes.
this is like a boutique situation versus.
It doesn't necessarily have to be boutique. I mean, this is the highest of the high end. I mean, these
Right.
units are selling for, I believe, $600,000 or more.
Right.
But it's Concord, and it's a
Right.
Concord market, and it also has the highest of the high-end finishes as well.
Right.
If you wanted to make all of those cottages sort of a mid-level finish, with your real estate market, I would imagine you probably would fall into potential affordability areas.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could do it. But you're right. I mean, the key is, will a developer respond to a 12-unit
Right.
development? And that's something that, particularly if you require that all the units be that affordability level, it's something that certainly would have to be well thought out. The more units on there, the denser the project, the more likely a developer is going to get a higher rate of return. But it's not your responsibility to say, we're going to give you the highest rate of return that's possible in the marketplace. We're just going to give you a reasonable rate of return that compares to T-bills or something of that nature.
So who, are you able to say, negotiate that affordability mix come contract time? You have to really specify that up front. You know what I mean? In other words, let's say
The
we.
RFP.
Yeah,
Well, that's why I was asking the question that I was asking. Is there a certain percentage or, I mean, I know that we control it, but that's the whole purpose of why I was asking that question.
so I get that, and I'm just wondering when you have to pull the trigger on that piece, because I'm almost thinking, I mean, look, I know you probably help us right through the process and everything, right?
Sure.
I would assume, right?
Absolutely.
But still, we're not experts in this, right? So you'd like to think that we could be able to call some audibles, getting close to signature time, and I'm just curious if
Well,
that's.
so, it's pretty funny. So I'm gonna take myself out of this seat for a second. And if I was a developer that was gonna develop that parcel and I knew that I'd take a look at it, that's why I asked the size of the lots, right? I'm gonna determine how many units I can put on there, I'm gonna perform out how much it's gonna cost me, and I'm gonna dictate how much my return is gonna be with X amount of affordable units. So what we're telling the developer is, we're setting the parameters.
Yes.
We're saying, hey, we want X amount of affordable units, everything else, and, we're kind of rolling the dice, he's gonna be able to pull this thing off.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
every
really.
developer is going to come up with likely a very different concept that you can choose.
Yeah.
Depending upon how you write that RFP, you might have 25 different conceptual designs to choose from, with different site layouts and different unit mixes, different amounts of landscaping, and even if you put a floor on the number of affordable units, say at least 20%, up to X percent, and you might even say that we'll give you a density bonus.
Okay, there you go. Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out, yeah.
Yeah.
And I gotta assume also that there's nothing stopping a respondent to the RFP to say, you know what, you specified this percentage, but I'm gonna put in a bid that says I'm only going this percentage, because that's what I could do, and you can reject it, or you could
Right.
end up accepting it, right?
Exactly.
That's right, you're absolutely right.
So I guess it is, yeah.
So, I mean, again, going back to the elements, I mean, I love what Concord did, you know, can our town afford $600,000 for a little cottage?
Okay, so which
No.
one's a conflict?
You know,
Oh, that's back to 11 again, okay.
And also.
This
we're
one
gonna
goes
be
to 11.
Investing, we need to invest the money that we have set aside wisely to make the greatest amount of impact that we can towards our goal.
Yeah.
Right, and so 10 units is beautiful, but we need 185, right? So the more progress we can make, I mean, now we could have other projects in the future, we don't have to accomplish it all with one project, but we need to be cognizant of
See,
that.
that's why I'm saying this, right? Because I'm just sitting here thinking, if we want to maximize that, right? But how far we really want to go is going to depend upon the balance between that and what it looks like and how well it fits,
Right.
right?
Right.
yeah, that's why that 22 number, why I asked the question about, you know, going back to the minimum that we would need to do to have a plan in
But-
place.
But let's face it, that annual progress is a short-lived safe harbor. And, you know, even the goal is so high, I mean, we have to realistically look at that. And, you know, like in my opinion, what we do, what that looks like, it's gonna be here for a long time, and we want it to be Mendon,
That's right.
is, you know, far supersedes the progress that we could make, because we're not gonna get to 200
Listen, we
something
only have
units
3.2 acres.
right away. It's a long slog.
You can't do much with 3.2 acres.
Right.
No, but it's a pilot.
Yeah, it
Yes.
is.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah. Did you say how much those were going for in Concord?
Yeah, you did.
Approximately 6. Yep.
That's what I did.
That's a lot of money.
That's
How
not
many do you
gonna,
want?
that's not,
I think they originally sold for in the 3s and 4s.
oh, okay.
Back, I think it was developed about
Even that,
7 or 8
I
years
mean, you
ago.
could buy a big house for that.
And you got a question?
Yeah, I just had a couple comments. I think, you know, the idea of the community green and the houses is a nice format, pedestrian friendly. But since we're only on that small acreage, and because there are a lot of wetlands around the property, it seems like we should try to have as many units on that area as possible, because we have 75 acres of open space around it, so it's not
Right.
like it's gonna be concrete around the development. So for a developer, would it be profitable for them if, we have to figure out how many units would go on that, because we just have the well and septic, right? To say, if we want all affordable houses, you know, on the property, you know, as many as we can for that small property, you know.
Well, and I agree with that, and that's one of the reasons why I had said that the townhouses across the street are very
Across the street
attractive.
from here.
Yeah, they're extremely attractive. And the good news is that they're sandwiched up against each other, so I think they have 4 units or is it 2 units per?
It's 2 and 2, yeah.
It's 2 and 2.
But could you do something that would be desirable for a developer? You know, if they were small, I mean, because like for a single person, you know, you don't need a lot of bedrooms, you know, you might want
Right.
one, you know, 2 bedrooms, it's, you know, smaller.
Yeah, I think those
But if you find a
condos only,
developer to do it, it's not my question.
yeah, I think those condos only went for a couple hundred, $250,000, $200,000.
Get something that's profitable for the developer at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Ann said makes sense, because you don't necessarily need to focus as much on providing a green space there, because you have
Right.
so much open space behind you that I'm sure we'll eventually do some trail systems with, and so,
Yeah.
But you still want enough green space.
well, right.
Even if it's like the front porches with the green in front.
Right.
You know, you want.
But you don't have to do this, like a big garden area as much, like with some of these, as you would there because of that aspect.
Yeah, just thinking out loud, I mean, you could reverse it where you have, you know, you're parking in the central area and everybody's got an open view out onto some gorgeous.
Or, you know,
Their
what
own
I'm
back
thinking is like
area.
a road that comes down and does like a circle, and you just have the houses or the condos or whatever you do, you know, surrounding the circle.
Yep.
And in the middle of the circle is your common space. You could do a fire pit there, like you said, you could You just throw some trees there, you could do whatever, and put a couple of benches, a gazebo, you know, you could do whatever there in the middle of it. And then, you know, folks, you know, have to have a place to park, though, that's the,
Usually that's the challenge, and you're either gonna rear load or front load and lose the aesthetics of one facade versus the other.
right.
Unless you create a parking area that is separate and distinct outside of that major area. And that may not necessarily be a good solution if you're focusing on anybody that might be seniors.
Yeah,
Or they don't want to make that walk.
Sure.
So, but lots of different things to think about, a lot of different designs and options and layouts that are potentially very attractive, and certainly we'll continue to collect. We're actually creating a multifamily housing database of photographs right now that's a lot more than what you see right here, and certainly we would love to make that available to you to look at as well. So.
I mean, I love the exercise. I am gonna be super curious to see how this survey comes back. I mean, that's really what I'd really like to see. I mean, I agree with what Ann's saying, though, in respect to the number of units. I'd like to see them all affordable.
But that's can you answer my question?
Sure, Chris.
Yeah, so I'm curious, are we just making it crazy to think that on this property, we could have all affordable units, have them be attractive, have a lot of them, and have a developer interested in building it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You could definitely have an apartment complex that uses high-end design, both exterior and interior, have high-end site design, have it relatively dense in terms of the site itself, sort of clustered in the middle, and as long as the traffic counts come out reasonable, and certainly if it's a rental property, it will all count toward the subsidized housing inventory. So let's say, for example, you've got 3.2 acres, and you go to a density of, let's start with 8. So you could feasibly have 24 units at 8 units per acre on that 3 acres. If you went up to 12, now we're up to 36 to 40 units that are on that site. So, you can progressively, obviously, multiply the per acre density by the site size and see what you can get out of it.
I just know that there's been developments where
That's what
it's just, it's densely built, but then it's just all concrete and asphalt. It would just be nice to, have small units, have them be affordable, have some greenery.
But we're not gonna figure that out.
That space between buildings is really important. It's not just parking or just a four-bedroom space. We will design, we will provide some guidance.
Do you think that?
You really gotta talk into the microphone, and you probably should be addressing the chair anyway, sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that space between buildings is not a forgotten space. It has a definition. We have to at least provide some guidelines for it. In urban design, even that space between buildings is somehow more important than buildings, because that provides your safety, your pleasure, and it may brings the market and the price up. It's really important.
I'm looking at 10 minutes at 9. I'm not sure how far you want to go along with this. For me, what I'm struggling with is I'm so curious of what the town has to say. This survey to me is paramount, at this point. And I think, I was just whispering into my colleagues' ears, I think really what we need to determine is what is our goal? What are we trying to achieve here?
Right.
Because that's going to dictate design at that point. Yes. Right? And I don't know what that answer is.
I'd love to double the number of units we got now. If we get 40 affordable, and maybe that's crazy. But wouldn't that be nice to double the number we got?
Well, it's certainly possible, but as you know, for every unit, there's approximately 300 square feet of asphalt in the form of a parking space and the aisle space that has to be provided as well. Right. So if you have 40 units, just multiply that by 300 square feet, and that's how much asphalt at a very minimum you're going to need, unless you want to have covered parking, underneath. And that costs, I think, $10,000 to $70,000 dollars per space. Yeah. As a builder, you're going to know that, obviously.
That's right, yeah.
So a lot of things to think about. The other thing also, though, to keep in mind is that some communities, for example, if you're heavy on senior population, you don't necessarily have to go to 2 cars per unit. You can maybe go to 1.5 or 1.25 cars per unit. A lot of different things to think about because, not necessarily do a lot of apartment complexes in Boston say you get 1 parking space assigned to you. If you want a second parking space, it's $100 a month. And that's a way to keep, the parking needs down as well.
Yeah, I probably want to go that way. I mean, we're trying to attract younger folks here also, and if they, younger folks are coming into the community, I guarantee that, if it's a husband and a wife scenario, there's going to be 2 cars.
Absolutely.
So, I wouldn't be supportive of trying to decrease our parking. I think that, in my opinion, 2 spots per unit would be a necessity if we're trying to attract a younger generation. I could see that for an elderly generation, there's no doubt about it.
Can I make one other point, if you don't mind? In response to the woman's question, you don't necessarily have to have a sea of asphalt. You can have a parking lot broken up into segments of 6 parking spaces with a landscaped island, 6 more parking spaces. You can use low-impact development for stormwater instead of this massive, sedimentation pond. You'd have these small rain gardens and gullies and things like that make it a more natural kind of feel. So you can definitely nestle the parking within a greener landscape and make it seem very, very attractive.
Well, so, I mean, clearly, we know that we're not doing anything urban here.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can take that right off of the design.
So the only other input I would have, just picking up on something Selectman Reel said before, is that the way I look at these is it's an awesome opportunity for people to have somewhere else to go that already live in Mendon. To me, that's like the most important thing to me, right? Because how many people have we heard say, I can't afford to stay here anymore? I mean, Mrs. Cutler, right? So she found a lot finally, and they built a smaller home. They didn't need a big McMansion, right? So they built and they were lucky enough to be able to do that, but not everybody is. So to me, that's the first priority, being able to have Mendon people be able to stay in Mendon.
And so many people that I went to school with have all left because they don't have an available housing unit or, housing stock in Mendon.
Sure.
They're not going to buy a 4-bedroom home, So we educate all of our children here, and then they all leave.
Yeah.
What are our next steps? First of all, did we accomplish all your goals for tonight?
I think yes. I think it was good. The feedback that you provided us was excellent. I think it kind of narrows down some of the focus that we would put into the design guidelines. I think certainly allowing the online survey to play out. And if you're curious, you can give us a ring and we'll let you know how it's trending, because SurveyMonkey does provide, on the basis of each survey that's submitted as to the statistics. But I think maybe, and I don't know what Ron's exact timeline is, but we certainly would provide you with feedback in terms of what the survey said. We'll write a little report about it. We'll talk a little bit about what we think it says that people want, and you're subject to interpret that any way you want to. And then I think it's up to you to inform us as to how we should begin thinking about the design guidelines document and the RFP and how to write it. Make it flexible, make it very specific, a lot of different ways to approach it.
The survey is just a survey that we took, and that's it, right?
Yes, there's no other components for it. No.
Okay, it's funny, I'd be curious to see if folks wanted, more units than less units, or, I'm not sure how far we would want to expand the survey, or if we even want to expand the survey. I'm just curious. I'm just curious how people feel. I heard somebody knocking. I don't know, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question you just
So I guess what I'm saying, we just had a pretty extensive dialogue on the number of units. We've had pretty extensive dialogue on, do we want houses versus condo units? Yeah, but that's not part of the survey.
Okay, so expand the survey itself,
Yeah,
not
so-
the,
so-
okay, because I was misunderstanding
Yeah.
okay, got it, yeah.
I think you could glean, though, let's say, for example, I'm going to walk over here. Say you get some positive feedback with this on the low-density end, but let's say, for the sake of argument, you might get some positive feedback on something like this. Or you might get some positive feedback on something like this.
Gotcha.
And what that does is that tells us, not only do they like the design, that they're comfortable with the density that represents.
Okay.
So from that in mind, the higher scores that some of these denser developments, provide us, gives us a little bit, at least of an assumption, that people might be comfortable with something a little bit more dense than Concord Riverwalk.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just trying to help get us steered in the right direction. That's all I'm doing.
I'd be afraid of making the survey too long. I think it already, even by the time I got over here, I was
getting
done.
tired?
40 pictures can be kind of a big lift. So, and I was also going to say, I just like to reiterate that this isn't going to be the only public event that we have planned. There's going to be a second one. And we can work with Bill as to when in the process that occurs. Like, we have it tentatively scheduled for it being closer to the end of it, where we sort of have things produced. But if we feel like we're getting a lot of good feedback, if we're getting good conversations online, a lot of people are responding to the RFP, we can always move that up and try to do it so that we can get more live feedback if people seem like they're really interested in it.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that we're definitely moving in a forward direction no matter what. So we're gonna really need folks to get engaged in this thing, and if they don't, well, they don't.
It's the three of us and
Yeah.
everyone here.
Yeah, exactly, but, this is gonna move forward one way or another, so, Ann?
It would be nice to have the November town meeting as a kind of an endpoint, so that maybe, we can collect enough information and then have an RFP to present to town meeting and saying, this is what we're looking at, because I think you need to have permission, right, if you can sell the property, what do you think of that? So it just seems like a good.
And that was sort of that is what's driving our timeline. Our timeline is looking to try to get this wrapped up by the end of October, with the idea that so you will be able to have something to
Is that too
present.
late for the warrant?
If you're gonna have some action, you'll have it ready for town
When
meeting.
I'm just curious on what, I'm asking the date of when we need to be completed for the warrant. I mean, we haven't said it, but I'm just scared,
That's
pick it
fine, I mean.
About the
if
first
we
week in
can-
November.
Yeah,
First week in
and we can
November,
put anything on there as a placeholder.
Yeah.
Just pass over.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I just want.
Yeah, my only hesitancy there is just that stuff like this, I like at annual town meetings, but I don't think we want to wait another whole, whole year.
You can also advertise and
Right.
publicize that we have.
I want to see us do that heavily. I think when we have the second one of this, let's even have a, I don't know, I suggest, Chairman Burke as one of your first big action items is maybe get a little brainstorming session. We figure out all the ways we're gonna make sure we go forward with this and advertise all the different places we could drum it up so we get the largest turnout we can get.
We can have our coffee hour surrounding this subject.
Yeah, that too, exactly, yeah.
If you're interested, I'm not sure if it's in the budget, Ron will probably hit me for saying this, but what we did for the West Brookfield Master Plan project is we sent a postcard to every single address in town. And when we threw out the survey for the master plan and asked people how they heard about the survey, 60% of them said postcard.
Okay.
So if you're interested for the second event, we might be able to try to
What
work
did
this out.
that run per household? Do you remember, roughly?
I think it was 42 cents.
Oh, the cost of postage.
Did you, in your second meeting, did you see a much larger turnout?
We actually had so much turnout that they said, wow, we have more people here than we get at most of our town meetings.
That was the first one?
Well, we haven't had our second one yet, but
Oh, yeah.
the postcard was sent out for the first public meeting.
Oh, I see, I see.
Well, we almost have the number of people we had at the annual town meeting here.
You're bringing up a
We're
very,
doing such a great job.
you're bringing up a very good point about the mailing, because the terrific response that we got for a master plan survey was because we did mail paper copies out.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should get, we should get on some of this. I want to help into this.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so what are our next steps? Outside of the survey, it's just waiting for feedback from you guys and trying to get the
We have-
word out,
Yeah,
or?
we have a lot of work to do, getting facts, constraints, information pulled together.
Okay,
Um,
so we'll just wait to hear back from you, Bill, and
Mhm.
we'll let you kind of lead the ship, and,
Yeah, thank you for your participation in this. It's really interesting to hear you guys echoing, what I hear all the time, about what the need is. I think that's fairly clear, even if it's not really articulated.
And the thing I'd like to, anybody listening, anything, but I think I'd like to encourage people to resist the temptation to attach an emotional meaning to the word affordable.
Thank you.
They really need to dig in, understand what we talked about tonight, and ask questions, and it may not be exactly what they think it is.
Right.
In many cases, affordable is the younger people in town, the people who work in public service, firefighters, teachers, a lot of people that we know personally.
Yeah.
great. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
No, thank you very much for
Thanks
coming
for
in.
having us, appreciate it very much.
All right, that was good. That was pretty neat.
Maybe we can put
Time
something in the
flew, I
crier.
enjoyed that.
It was actually pretty positive. This table just keeps on moving on me.
Insert in the crier.
I tried
Yeah,
it.
something, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Maybe BVT can print them.
All right, I don't think we have anything else to discuss tonight, right?
Is
I
the
believe so.
selectmen's copy? I don't think so.
Nope, so I'll take a motion.
Motion to adjourn, Mr.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you
Hey,
very
who's
much.
doing the motions now? Me or you? Is that me now?